It was a bitter January morning when Grace first noticed the man, sitting on a wooden bench just outside the diner where she worked the morning shift. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, his coat threadbare and stained, and a weathered wool cap barely covered his unkempt hair. Most people crossed the street to avoid the sight or simply ignored him, but not Grace. She paused by the window that day, watching as the man pulled a thin blanket around himself. Something about him stirred an ache deep in her chest. Maybe it was the way he looked at the people passing by, not with bitterness, but with something that almost resembled longing. That night, as she was packing up leftovers from the diner, she slipped a warm meal into a paper bag and took it out to him. He flinched when she approached. "I just thought you might like a hot meal," she said gently. The man looked up, surprised. His eyes were a deep gray, tired, guarded, but intelligent. He accepted the food without a word. Grace smiled and returned inside, never expecting thanks. The next day, she did it again and again. So, every day for weeks, the man who never gave his name became part of her routine. Grace began to look forward to the brief moments they shared. Sometimes he said thank you. Other times, he simply nodded. Occasionally, he asked about the weather or made a small comment about the taste of the soup. It wasn't much, but it was more than the silence the world gave him. Grace was barely holding her own life together. Her father had passed away the year before, and her younger sister, Hope, had been in and out of the hospital ever since, sick, frail, and dependent on medications Grace could barely afford. The diner's wages barely kept the rent paid and the lights on. Some nights Grace skipped dinner herself to make sure she could bring that man something warm. Her friends said she was foolish. "You can't save everyone, Grace," they told her. "I know," she would reply softly, "but I can try to save one." Then came the snowstorm. A brutal, unrelenting blizzard blanketed the city. Grace stayed late at the diner that night, packing 2 hot meals, one for her and one for the man. But when she stepped outside, the bench was empty. For the first time in over a month, he was gone. Worried, Grace walked through the snow, calling out, searching near the alleyways and bus shelters. Her fingers were numb, her shoes soaked. Finally, under the bridge, she found him. He was curled against a concrete pillar, shivering violently. "You'll freeze to death here," she said, panic rising in her chest. He tried to speak, but the cold had stolen his voice. Without another thought, Grace took off her coat and wrapped it around him. Then she called the only number she could, her landlord, Mr. Benton, who had a beat-up van and a heart slightly softer than his scowl. Together, they drove the man to a shelter across town. Grace stayed there that night, holding his hand until he stopped shaking. The next morning, he was gone again. The shelter staff said he left early without saying a word. Weeks passed. Grace resumed her routine. Her sister's health got worse, the diner hours were cut, and eviction notices started appearing on her door. And yet, she never regretted helping the man. Somewhere in her heart, she hoped he was okay, warm, fed, and safe. Then one late spring afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside the diner. A sharply dressed man in his late 50s stepped out. His gray eyes sparkled beneath a neat haircut and a perfectly tailored suit. Grace was wiping tables when he entered. "A Grace," he said, smiling. She froze. It was him, clean-shaven, upright, unrecognizable, almost, except for those eyes. "I'm Jameson Blackwell," he said. "You, and I owe you more than I can ever repay." She stared, speechless. He handed her a sealed envelope and said only, "Thank you for seeing me." When no one else did, inside the envelope was a letter and a check. A check for $250,000. The letter read, "Grace, I'm not who I seemed. I wasn't always homeless. In truth, I'm a man who lost faith in people when my family betrayed me, and I stepped away from my wealth to see if kindness still existed, if love could be given freely. You fed me, not just with food, but with compassion. You reminded me of what I used to believe in. Use this however your heart tells you, for your sister, for your future. Just promise me one thing, never stop being you." With eternal gratitude, Jameson Blackwell Grace burst into tears right there in the diner. She used part of the money to pay for her sister Hope's surgery and treatment. She cleared her debts. Then she did something even more beautiful. She opened a small cafe across from a children's hospital. A place where patients' families could eat for free, where the homeless would always find a hot meal and a warm heart. She called it Grace's Table. And every day she set aside one plate of food at a table near the window, Sometimes it stayed full. Sometimes a quiet man in a gray suit would sit there and smile, but always, always, it was there just in case. Because Grace knew one thing better than most. One kind act can change a life, and sometimes it can even save one.